Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this Kojo in Our Community event, What an Ongoing Pandemic Means for Local Businesses. I'm Alexia Brown, engagement producer for WAMU and DCS. Before we get started, we send a special thank you to our sponsor, AARP District of Columbia. You can learn more by visiting aarp.org/BC. We're offering live captions for this event. If you'd like to use them, select the closed captions option at the bottom of your Zoom window and then click Show Subtitle. This event is a conversation and we want to hear from you. We encourage you to ask questions, make a comment, or share your experiences throughout the event. I'll be fielding your questions and comments for our panelists. If you'd like to participate, click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, type your questions in and your comments, and then click send. Make sure to add your first name and your location if you're okay with us sharing that during the conversation. And our producers will be combing through the comments to make sure we're not asking any duplicates. I'll be the one reading your questions to Kojo and our guests. I apologize in advance for any mispronunciations, but make sure to get your questions in early because there tends to be a rush at the end of the event. So again, we thank you so much for being with us this evening. And with all of that housekeeping out of the way, here's Kojo Nnamdi.
Thank you so much, Alexia. Hello and welcome to you all. Before we begin, I'd just like to take a moment to thank our sponsor for tonight's event, AARP DC. So without further ado, let's get started. Businesses in DC have been grappling with the coronavirus pandemic since March of 2020. Hundreds of local restaurants and shops have temporarily or permanently closed. Many reopened as vaccinations rolled out, but because of the Delta variant, they face more uncertainty about the future. How has the pandemic changed the way we do business, the way we work, and what we buy? And what are the long-term impacts of the coronavirus on our local economy? Joining me now to discuss this is Ali Schweitzer. Ali is WMU's housing and development reporter. Ali, good to see you, if just virtually.
Good to see you, Kojo.
Anika Hobbs is the founder and owner of Nubian Human. Anika, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Danielle Harris is the chef and owner of Little Food Studio and District Grace. Danielle, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, appreciate it.
And Leona Agouidis is the executive director of the Golden Triangle Business Improvement District, which represents a 43-block area in downtown DC. Leona Agouidis, good to see you again.
Same here, Kojo. Thanks for inviting me.
Ali, I'll start with you. As part of your work for DC IST and WMU, you documented local business closings in the district since March 2020, when we all went home, it seems. What did you find?
Well, the big takeaway was one that we've heard quite a lot about since the start of the pandemic, and that was essentially that hospitality businesses were hit very hard and very quickly. Dozens of closures in rapid succession, particularly dining. So hotels, restaurants, cafes, any place that depended on workers reporting to the office every day and getting coffee and lunch, it was really a death sentence for many of those businesses. We counted dozens of closures in downtown DC alone in a very short period. We also saw, as you imagine, severe impacts in the entertainment sector. You could guess why. I mean, any business that essentially depends on crowds of people coming into a single room together, very close, they were doomed, truthfully, from the start of the pandemic. And the impact was severe. So overall, DCS and WMU, we counted about 375 closures, both permanent and temporary, across the city in the span of a year. And we think that is definitely a conservative estimate because there's not particularly great data on this. That most of the data work that we did was anecdotally driven. So there are lots of businesses that we were not able to capture. And I'll say this too, and to a large extent, this is not over. In this region, consumer spending on entertainment is still about 30% lower than it was before the pandemic. Restaurant spending is down almost 20%, and that is a major disincentive for workers. If you depend on tips to make a living, you're less likely to want to go back to that job now. And that, I think, is the truly long tail that we're seeing. Spending is still down, so workers aren't coming back, and that's hampering the recovery for the economy and for businesses.
But are there any trends that struck you about where and about how people are spending their money?
Well, one really interesting trend that we picked up on, and this was sourced from data that Harvard collected as part of the Opportunity Insights program, was that in certain communities, particularly in the district, we focused on DC just to have a focus, is that we noticed that consumer spending in some of the lowest income parts of the city at the height of the pandemic actually increased over pre-pandemic levels. And we think that has something to do with the safety net programs that were relatively quickly dispatched by the federal government early on in the pandemic. So that, what was it, $600 a week in federal unemployment supplement? That was, as we know, more money than many people earned at their day jobs before the pandemic. So that extra spending was actually a really big boost in some communities that are disproportionately impacted by poverty. And then in the wealthier communities, we saw a lot of people split town. A lot of people left to go to second homes, or they relocated permanently, or they went to go live with mom. And so they stopped spending money in their communities locally. So those were that was kind of the story of how spending had a disparate geographic impact during the pandemic. And to some extent, we're seeing some of that still play out.
Tanika Hobbs, you're the owner, as we mentioned earlier, of Nubian Human. For those who may not know, tell us what Nubian Human is and where you're located.
Yeah, so we are a retail ecosystem. So we have 2 stores in Washington, D.C., and then also Baltimore, Maryland. And we focus on Black-owned and Brown-owned brands exclusively. And we sell men's, ladies, kids' clothing, art, beauty products, anything you essentially need. We have it here.
As a business owner, what was it like when the coronavirus first came to DC? And what was your process for deciding how to scale back or how to shut down?
Yeah, it was interesting because we had to close on March 13th of 2020. And we actually have our annual event called the Black Love Experience, which was supposed to take off on March 21st, 2020, with an expected attendance of about 3,500 people. In-person event. So it wasn't only that I was thinking about the stores, it was also this revenue generating event as well. And so it was a pretty scary process, just not knowing and, kind of thinking that things were going to turn around very quickly, which obviously they didn't. It was a lot of stop and go with not a lot of answers. So, but for us, we're very much community based, and as the data had shown, it was our communities that were impacted the most. And so we had to decide to cancel or postpone or close.
And how did you deal with the whole Black Love Experience event itself?
Yeah, we had to turn that in so many different types of iterations. So we thought that we could continue with it. And then our venue, was like, we can't do that because of COVID. Then we decided to do a hybrid, which we were going to do in Prince George's County in parking lots. So we were going to do like an external event outside and then do part of it virtually. But then that's when the order went out that there could be no gatherings over 100 people or more. And like I said, we were expecting 3,500. So then we just had to cancel that. And then we did it completely virtually.
Well, Anika, how did you transition Nubian Human so you could continue to do business during this pandemic? And how would you say you're doing now?
Yeah, we definitely had to transition in a lot of different ways. Even just like our product assortment had to completely change. So we focused on apparel beforehand. We had a large amount of apparel in our stores. A lot of it was international. We work with a lot of brands on the African continent or the African diaspora. And so that obviously changed because supply chains were broken. Mailing and shipping was importing was crazy. So we mostly worked with a lot of more national brands. And then we really tried to focus on the essentials that we thought our customer needed. So any sort of beauty products, home products, things like that. We really started to focus on. Even during the holiday season, we just thought, everybody's at home. So focusing more on greeting cards and things you can do with your family, games. And that wasn't necessarily the premise of our business before, but we found that there was a need for it because of the pandemic. And so, of course, that completely changed how we work in the stores. And then just even our basic store routines of how we open and close our stores, what happens when a customer leaves, our sanitizing and, just routines are completely different. So.
But it just strikes me that this was not only a learning experience for you and everybody else that you're talking to, but it was also an experience in your capacity or ability to innovate. How do you think you did?
Yeah, I think we did pretty well. I mean, obviously, like a lot of businesses, when we had to close, we transitioned very, very quickly to doing everything online. So our customer service, our CRM, everything kind of changed. How do we communicate with our customer virtually and digitally? We had to continuously tell our story because we wanted them to know that we were still here and we were still here to serve our customers. You know, and even just within brands, like me buying from certain brands, we were allowing ourselves to give each other different types of terms as far as purchasing and buying and selling, just because we were all going through it at the same time. You know, we even came up with a locker system. We have like an Amazon-like locker system in our stores. So for local brands that weren't able to reach their customers and their customers wanted their product quickly, they could actually come to our store and pick it up. So we've tried all sorts of things just to keep everyone engaged, but most importantly, safe.
As we mentioned earlier, Danielle Harris is the chef and owner of Little Food Studio and District Grace. Danielle, what were you doing when the pandemic began? And work-wise, what was it like for you?
So when the pandemic made its way through, I was serving in front of the house at a sort of casual fine dining restaurant in Capitol Hill. And I'll never forget the night that we were told that we could no longer be in service. A group of us kind of all went out after work and got drinks. And that was the last time you could go out and do that also. So after that, I was kind of in limbo for a while. My business had slowed down personally. I hadn't taken on that
What was your
clients. Just private dining events and the District Grace catering stuff. So yeah, I was just kind of in limbo, like many of my fellow hospitality industry folks, signing up for unemployment like everyone and hoping for the best. And then I was fortunate enough to snag a full-time management position at a Jenny's Ice Cream, which is something I'd never done before. Retail food and beverage management is a whole other ball game. But it was interesting and I learned so much from that job. And kind of through everything and navigating my own business and the programs for relief that were out there, I was able to sign a lease on a space on Upshur Street Northwest and just said, you know what, we all are just sitting around. Let me just try to build something. It's a really tiny space and it is a carry out only. So I kind of think that it's COVID proof. We have a takeout window literally that we custom built right off of our coffee bar. And so it's sort of taken a life of its own. I'm super grateful and privileged to be able to employ 7 people in a pandemic. And yeah, it's been a wild ride.
Little Food Studio. Why did you decide to open it now?
Honestly, I decided to open it now just because it all fell into place. I had no intention of setting out like, oh yeah, now's the time. I essentially was looking for a retail space for a mobile concept, like a food truck concept that I've had for a while. In order to open one of those type of businesses, you have to have access to a kitchen so you can take out your trash and properly store your foods at the end of the day. So I was thinking, well, maybe I could find something on my own without going into one of the larger shared spaces, because that was a concern for me going into a shared kitchen that there are so many of in DC, but in a pandemic. So I was just looking around. I scour the internet all the time. I'm always on Facebook Marketplace, always on Craigslist. You never know what you'll find. So I ended up on Upshur Street and I saw a building. However, it was mostly for retail. So that didn't work out, obviously. And then I took another meeting for a second building on Upshur Street through a recommendation from a friend. That was out of the budget. So literally, as I left that meeting, I walk across the street and I see another for rent sign. And I just walk over, introduce myself, and then I sign the lease 2 weeks later. So I always say that Upshur Street chose me.
Yeah, well, I spend way too much time on Upshur Street, so you'll probably be seeing me. What has the reception been like from the community?
It has been overwhelmingly wonderful. We are nearly double and a half my expectations as far as the day-to-day sales. People have been super generous and super kind. We've had many hiccups with having to close and open because of different things. Like we had a lot of refrigerator failure towards the beginning of opening the business. And most recently, probably about maybe a month ago or so, we had total refrigerator failure on one of our units. And it was a half refrigerator, half freezer. And it just wasn't functioning anymore. And we were our air conditioning system was not up to par. So we had to close for a few days. And through the generosity of our customers, we were able to raise enough funds to buy a new refrigerator so that we could open again sooner. So it's been truly incredible.
Customers have been helping you to run the place. If you have any questions about the effects of the ongoing pandemic on local businesses, don't be shy. You can go to the Q&A box to ask a question. Have any of your favorite businesses closed? Have new businesses that you love opened? Share with us in the Q&A box. It can be a question, or it doesn't have to be a question. It can also be a comment. Leona Agüidas, business improvement districts have been around, at least in this city, for decades, but they're not as high profile as some people might expect or want them to be. So you might start by explaining what a business investment district or BID is, and what has been the role of BIDs during the pandemic?
So we are nonprofit organizations, and we are headquartered in certain geographic areas. There are 11 BIDs in the District of Columbia, and each of us is in a different geographic location. And we respond to the needs of that location to make it a better place for people to come. And so in our location, we are basically the central business district, the part of the city that you think of as downtown. It's the area around Farragut Square, just north of the White House and south of DuPont Circle. From Black Lives Matter Plaza over to Washington Circle. So, I used to work for Metro for 10 years, and I think of it as the neighborhood around Farragut Square, Farragut North, and DuPont Circle South. But, we aren't the star of the show. We're the people that kind of make it work for everybody. So if you've been in that area a lot, you think of us as the people who wear yellow. We clean the streets, we landscape the streets, we provide events in Farragut Square and in the other parks. We do a lot of public art. We have a homeless outreach program, and we try to market and support the businesses in the area, both in the ground floor and upstairs in the office buildings.
Why is it called the Golden Triangle?
That's a name that our founders created. So apparently the triangle that is created by roughly Connecticut Avenue, Pennsylvania Avenue, and New Hampshire Avenue. And that's an old real estate term, apparently.
And how many businesses are there in the Golden Triangle?
Yeah, so in the office, we have about 4,000 office businesses. That fluctuates based on the size of the office. There are 34 million square feet of office space. That's big. That's bigger than a lot of cities in many ways. And it used to be about 450 ground floor businesses, retail or restaurant businesses. Ali was talking earlier about all the closures, and I know she was getting information from us. We currently have 129 of them permanently closed. And then others are temporarily closed and some are open. So COVID's hit the downtown pretty hard.
Ali, I know that one day I went down on K Street where I was never able to find parking ever before. And all of a sudden there were all of these parking meters open on K Street. Ali, how have downtown regions been impacted by the pandemic?
I would like Leona to speak more about that, but because you know better than anybody, I know that when we were doing most of our reporting around the impact on downtown DC economy, we focused on the downtown DC bid, which has different boundaries than the Golden Triangle bid, but it does represent a significant portion of downtown DC. And during the height of the pandemic, downtown DC reported that it had lost 90% of its daytime foot traffic. Just imagine what the impact is on businesses that were completely dependent on office workers coming through or other workers just coming through downtown on a daily basis. But actually, I would love to hear Leona talk a little bit more about what that looked like from where she was standing.
Yeah, and that's exactly.
Leona, you might be able to talk numbers. How many people are still working downtown in person, and what's foot traffic look like?
So prior to COVID, we would have about 90,000 people a day come into the neighborhood, and that was based on pedestrian counts and and other things. We look at a number of data sources to kind of get to that number, and also looking at the number of jobs in the area. Like the downtown bid, because they're on the east side of 16th Street, we're on the west side. Like them, we saw 90% reduction in our pedestrian traffic. We have counters on light poles. So, 1 out of every 10 people who used to be downtown would come down there for more than a year. And this was the same data that we would see through the Metro counts, and the same data that we would see from the buildings that were operating. And of course, like Ali said, that is the lifeblood of the downtown businesses. If there's nobody nearby that lives up the street that can, come by and pick up a delivery, or takeout. And so we had a lot of businesses really just close really soon after the pandemic started.
What type of impact has tourism, or the lack of tourism, had on hotels in the Golden Triangle area?
Well, interestingly enough, the tourism numbers are a little bit higher than the office numbers. Now, clearly for about a year and 4 months or so, everything was down. But this summer, we started to see a little bit of that tourism return. Now, is it anything to brag about? No, it's about 30%, 35% of what we used to have. But, walking around K Street, like you said, Kojo, I wouldn't see people, and I still don't see that many people who are going to their office. But in the height of the summer, I would see a lot of tourists that were coming by, and the businesses were grateful for that little bit.
Some people may not understand, why is it important for DC's office buildings to be filled?
Because of the revenue, a couple of things. The revenue that the workers bring, and remember, the people who work in the buildings are not only from the District of Columbia, but also from Maryland and Virginia. So that money is coming in, it's supporting the businesses in the neighborhood, and it's creating tax revenue. But the other part of it is, and I didn't know anything about real estate until I started working here in years ago. But the other thing is, your building has to be full in order to have value. And that value is what determines your property tax. And so when the building is empty, the value of it is lower, and the property tax assessment is lower. And it's very sadly, that takes year, 2 years, 3 years to catch up. So really, we're not going to see we're starting to see the effects. The assessments have gone down about 10%, which means 10% less tax revenue, but it will continue. It's going to take a while to catch up. And just to give you an example, and I can't really say what the buildings are, but we had one hotel that was negotiating right before COVID, the days right before, and that stopped, and it just sold for half the amount it was negotiating for. That's huge. We have another group of office buildings that was owned by one company that sold for about 70% of the value that the Office of Tax and Revenue has put on it. So again, what does that mean? That means less money coming in as tax revenue, and it will take a little while to catch up, but it will catch up.
Remember, if you have questions or comments, you can go to the Q&A box to ask that question or to make your comment. Have any of your favorite businesses closed, or have they in fact expanded? Have new businesses that you love opened? You can go to the Q&A box and make your comment or ask a question there. Danielle Harris, while people working from home hurt areas like downtown DC, it may, on the other hand, have helped neighborhood businesses. Do you think that was the case, or that is the case with Little Food Studio?
I think 100% the case. People's routines have just changed due to the pandemic. Obviously, not going to work, working from home, kids being at home instead of at school. So we've seen a difference in our foot traffic from sort of more heightened COVID situations to now where folks are going back to work, kids are going back to school. And over the summer, even, I mean, post-vaccination summer is what I'm calling it, because everyone is out traveling, enjoying the sun. So we definitely saw that traffic change. And I'm excited to see what the fall brings us. And hopefully we can, hopefully hop into some office catering or holiday sales as things sort of return to the new normal.
Well, Ali Schweitzer, so Danielle found a niche focused on people working from home. Any thoughts on people rediscovering neighborhood businesses? And could that turn into a longer term trend? It's frankly the reason why I have been hanging out around Upshur Streets for the last quarter of a century, is because it's close to where I live. And all of the places I like to go to are in that neighborhood.
Exactly. I mean, your experience, Danielle, is something that we've been hearing about anecdotally from a number of business owners. And on a personal level, I'll tell you that my husband's business, he owns a record store in Falls Church, Virginia. They had an incredible year. And we think it was entirely because of office workers stuck at home in suburban Virginia, where his store is, saying, hey, I really need a new record because I got nothing else to do. So coming into the store, certain businesses actually probably did better because of that effect. And anecdotally, I've also been hearing that the recovery for some suburban-based businesses has been faster, than some downtown. I know one notable example is the restaurants that are owned by the people who own Clyde's. They have a very big difference in the suburban return versus the downtown return. So the suburban restaurants they own are doing a little bit better than the ones downtown. So we're definitely starting to see people spend more money in their own neighborhoods. That's great news for businesses that are located near residential areas. It's not so great news for downtown areas.
Anika Hobbs, back to you. Your business is a little different, selling clothing in particular, when no one is going anywhere, must have been particularly challenging. I put on a white shirt tonight to wear in my house because I haven't put on a white shirt in the last year and a half. Did you pivot your business at all?
Yeah, we definitely did. I mean, there's actually a joke between my retail director and I that when the world kind of started opening back up, like pants were going to be hot. Like we were just going to be a store full of pants because nobody was used to wearing bottoms. But yeah, we definitely had to. We had to think about what did the customer need now. We found that a lot of our customers were so much more interested in beauty and grooming. So we started buying a lot deeper and a lot wider in those product categories. And then just like I said earlier, just kind of really things that you could do at home, like candles was really huge for us. Anything with home scents did amazing, as well as just like teas and things that were kind of things that made you feel happy at home, did really, really well with us. Whereas in before, everything was kind of like, how do I look when I'm outside or when I'm with my community? That completely changed. So.
And what's been the financial impact of this ongoing pandemic for Nubian Human? And what kinds of resources are there available to support you?
Yeah, I mean, so the impact has been huge. I mean, it's kind of like, I was in a Halcyon incubator in 2019 and into 2020. And, we do projections and things like that. And one of my mentors was like, don't even try to do financial projections anymore, because you just don't know. You don't know, for opening, closing, which makes it really hard to kind of figure out how to manage your business for the future. But you kind of take it on day by day. And just like Ali's doing, you just really look at the data to try to help you with that. And even just like ordering. So for the Q4, obviously the holiday season, usually you buy that as in August, September. This year we had to start looking at February. What is it that we need for the holidays? Because we don't know if we're going to be able to get it on time. So that changed a lot of things for us. And then relief wise, I have an interesting story that my grant writer, she was also a seamstress as well, but she was my grant writer. She did that in her professional life. She opened a sewing studio, I believe it was in 2019. And when COVID hit, she said, do you want to start selling masks? And I was like, no, I don't want to go into the business of selling masks. And she was like, okay. And so she started making them. Needless to say, that wasn't the best move on my part in the beginning. And so because she was so overwhelmed with making masks, she couldn't obviously write our grants anymore. So, internally I had to learn how to write more of my own grants. But luckily, DC, a lot of agencies, both, nationally and locally, really were great at supporting and seeing that we needed a lot of, help. So they built out opportunities to support, which has been great. But it's not viable long-term at all. So we're still trying to maneuver through with the kind of relief and support kind of getting a lot lower, especially with the SBA. It's closing in December. So EIDLs, you need to get that now. If you haven't, PPP, all of that, it's gone. But we're still just trying to navigate through it all, just find that one hero product that's just going to keep your doors open until we kind of get through it all.
I'm glad you mentioned the thing about grant writing, because that's what a lot of business owners have to do now, to seek to find where they can find grants. And Alexia, you have a question about how small businesses are recovering.
Yeah, we just got a question from one of our viewers. They ask, what, if anything, is happening to help local businesses come back or remain running while more and more big companies are flourishing during the pandemic? And how is this going to affect the long-term diversity of businesses?
Leona Agurides.
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. And in the Golden Triangle, that's one of the big pivots we made, right, at COVID, is first of all just really trying to help. And it was more so the small and local businesses, because they're the ones who needed our help the most, to help them learn about programs. We talked about, Nika just talked about PPP, EIDL, and other things. So giving them all of the information, and it was, things would change daily, and opportunities would come up daily, and writing grants and things. So we started by just helping them through that, giving them all of the information on the changes of the requirements and the closures. And then we started to move into this other area, which was, more and more marketing, what's open, what isn't open, using our social media platforms to run, special promotions and boost some of our posts to get that out there. But some of the things that I think the program that I was most excited about that we did was called Small Business Online. And I think it was Allie who earlier said that, it was all the foot traffic that kept the downtown businesses alive. And so what happened is that some of our businesses are older. They've been in the neighborhood for several decades, and they may not be as social media savvy or digitally savvy as some of the younger new entrepreneurs that are coming up. And so, we had some that had websites from the 1990s, some that didn't have e-commerce, some who never used social media. So we hired a firm, and we asked businesses, to kind of apply and to commit to spending a certain number of hours a week with this consultant who would help them, rewrite their website, redo their website, add e-commerce. One of them did. We had one who didn't even use Grubhub or Uber Eats or anything. And so they connected them with that. And that was, I think, in my mind, the coolest program, because we gave and we helped these businesses get these skills that would help them to flourish, even if there weren't, this drastic need. And now we've implemented a program really to help, I think, diversify the retail platform in the neighborhood, and to invite newer and smaller entrepreneurs, and almost kind of take advantage of the fact that there's all that vacancy that has to be filled. by landlords and make it a win-win for everybody.
Danielle Harris, what financial resources did you use to start your business?
So I used some of the EIDL funds. I was hopeful that I'd also be eligible for my own restaurant revitalization grant, but those monies just went away so fast. That was a really great opportunity, and I hope that gets funded again because besides me, there are tons of restaurants where it was just too little too late that came about specifically for restaurants. Because with that opportunity, you have to not only be open, but you have to have like kind of a few other things together to be able to apply quickly. And that just didn't happen for so many businesses. And it happened for the very large, multinational organizations. But the mom and pop shops, I think, kind of got snubbed. So I'm hoping that gets financed again. And yeah.
Indeed, Anika Hobbs, are there any resources that you wish were available that you couldn't find when navigating the pandemic? And did you have to lay off any workers?
Luckily, we did not have to lay off any workers. I'm so thankful for that. But I do think being a storefront, I think a lot of folks do forget about us just as we hear all of the stats throughout the night. For example, our store in DC is located inside the Anacostia Arts Center. It's a thriving building that has a theater and a lot of people host events here. But because all of that has been shut down, we've just been impacted not only just by like business closing, but the ability to entertain as well. So I think if there were more opportunities for unique situations like us, I think that would be really, really great.
Alice White, so what resources are available for local businesses that are still struggling financially?
Well, as Danielle and Anika have already mentioned, SBA, the U.S. Small Business Administration, is probably the best place for business owners to look. A lot of money that was available on the city level, the state level, it went pretty quickly. There still, I believe, is some money available to certain businesses in Maryland on the state level. Virginia may also still have a little bit of grant money left, but I encourage folks who are looking for loans, grants, to start with the SBA, and then also go look at what Governor Larry Hogan in Maryland has been doing lately with respect to business relief. And Virginia, you want to check their COVID-19 recovery page to see if those grant programs are also still open. I mean, a lot of it it has kind of dried up and it went really fast, but there are still opportunities.
If you are a business person in this region and you have tips for other owners, especially of small businesses, remember you can share that tip with us in the Q&A box, or you can ask a question. If you're a small business that has been having trouble surviving and finding grants, you could also go to the Q&A box and make a comment or ask a question. Leona, you have a program called Grow Golden that aims to help both landlords and local businesses. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I kind of mentioned it a little bit in passing just a couple minutes ago, but we have 129 vacant spaces, and we also have businesses that have not been able to afford the super high rents of the downtown for decades, right? And that's why we had a lot of banks and a lot of corporate kinds of stores. And so we went out to landlords and we said, would you be open to providing free rent for a period of time? We got commitments for 3 months free, and then some of them also said, and then 9 months at a percentage of about 8 to 10% of your sales. And so obviously we didn't do this during the height of COVID because that, that just would not have made sense. And we started to phase this in the late, I guess it was starting in July, the first business opened, and that is Spice Girlin at Connecticut and K. And that's owned by Angel Gregorio, who has Spice Suite in Tacoma Park. And that was our first one. Our second one opened just a couple weeks ago up at 1250 Connecticut. And That is DC Pop-Up by Shay Yaleen. And both of the two that I just mentioned are incubators. And they sell, like Anika talks about some of the products like teas and candles and things like that people really, spices that people really want right now. The third one opened on Friday. It's an art gallery called Ohm. And it's in a very small space in an office building, but it's a great opportunity to kind of bring art to the neighborhood, and it's cool and it's different. The next one is going to open up. It's called Community Unity by DC Sweet Potato Cake, and she is going to be right on Farragut Square. And then we have a couple others that are talking to the landlords. We match them up. We have on our website, it's called Grow Golden DC, the list of spaces that are still available. And, of course, as Danielle and Anika knows, you might be, a 500 square foot business, or you might be a 3,000 square foot business. You might need restaurant venting, or you might not. So it becomes one of these things where that right space for you may or may not be available. But we do have the inventory online, and there still are some spaces available.
Which means, I guess, that you are still accepting applications.
Yeah, we're accepting on a rolling basis, and we're adding, we're talking to landlords to try to get more inventory in there. There is an application, and you need to be in business for 3 years. And we've been working with DSLBD to get the program started, along with M&T Bank and the DC Chamber of Commerce and the US Chamber of Commerce. They've been, our partners helping us through this.
Alexia, we have a question.
Yeah, we sure do. John sent us a question. Thank you. The question is, what is the best online source of information on closed and new businesses? I live in the Golden Triangle, and I want to know when the many restaurants that have closed will reopen or be replaced.
So John, our website has, at least if you live in the Golden Triangle, that we're going to have your information for you, right?
So John can find the information at your website.
Mm-hmm. For that neighborhood.
Very good. Allie, worker sentiment seems to have shifted during the pandemic. Local restaurants struggling to find staff. Can you talk about that shift, particularly as it relates to the service industry?
This is what I feel is going to be one of the most enduring impacts of the pandemic. We have seen, especially when things were starting to look kind of hopeful back in June, when we thought that maybe this was going to be hot back summer and everybody's going to be back out and shopping and everything, that you saw businesses start to reopen, you saw restaurants start to reopen, but then you started to notice that they were only seating maybe a third of the dining room. And a lot of that is directly related to worker shortages, the ones we've been hearing about all over the US that have disproportionately affected the hospitality industry and broadly low wage industries across the board. So what this presents is kind of a long-term identity crisis, I think, for a lot of businesses in this sector, particularly dining. I mean, you look on the local level, and we're starting to, again, see this debate about the tipped minimum wage. That's coming back in DC after the DC Council overturned the democratically approved wage increase a couple of years back in 2018. Now it's coming back potentially, we think, maybe to the ballot next year. Why? It's entirely because worker sentiment has been shifting dramatically during the pandemic. We talk a lot about the Great Resignation, where people left their jobs. A lot of industries, I personally think, and this is not just my own opinion, this is actually based on news reports from across the country and data that's been coming in, is that we're going to see a contraction in a lot of these low wage industries and a shift toward jobs that require higher skills. And folks who were working in these low wage industries went back to school. They pursued other opportunities. In the DC area, we saw a lot of restaurant workers leave and actually enter the construction industry. So these are things that are going to be playing out, I think, for years. And I frankly don't know what a lot of restaurant owners in particular are going to do, because you're dealing with a large quantity of people who simply do not want to come back to work. And right now, I think a lot of that is being driven by the lack of foot traffic at restaurants, but there's going to be a larger shift in the kind of priorities that workers have going back. And this is, of course, happening in many sectors, but I think it's particularly pronounced in hospitality.
You seem to be suggesting that the realization that came to a lot of people who were stuck at home during the pandemic is that as they reflected on the jobs that they were doing, they said, you know what, that job sucks. I'm not going back to it again. I'm going to be doing something else. Is that what's going on?
I think for many people, yes. I do think there are practical considerations too. A lot of workers aren't coming back because they can't find good childcare. Some people might not want to come back because their kids can't be vaccinated. They don't want to expose their kids to Delta. They might be coming back. They might not be coming back simply because they don't have that job anymore. Unemployment benefits, of course, have ended, but there are a number of people who were collecting unemployment benefits who are waiting for their jobs to come back, and they never did. And that's particularly pronounced in hospitality. So yeah, you're right. I mean, people have this sort of wake up moment like, I don't have to grind away, for 65 hours a week at a restaurant anymore just to make ends meet. And for the first time, people were experiencing getting unemployment benefits and realizing they actually could kind of take a beat and rethink some choices and go back to school. So it's going to have a long tail.
Are you one of the people who decided to make a change during the pandemic to never go back to the job you had before and go in another direction? You can share that with us in the Q&A box. You can tell us what your experience has been, or if you have questions about people who have done that, you can also do that. Danielle Harris, at both Jenny's Ice Cream and Little Food Studio, have you found it harder to find or to retain workers?
Honestly, in my experience, no. I had a top-notch team when I left Jenny's. A lot of eager young kids. It's a great first job over there. And not even for a first job. I think that the difference there is the hourly plus tip combination is not that of your typical server at a restaurant. And I kind of modeled that in my own business. And fortunately, it's been going really well. I think that is the initial incentive for people to want to come back to this industry, because it's hard work. Even at Jenny's Ice Cream, it's grueling on the body, standing for 8-hour shifts or longer, taking care of people who don't want to cooperate with city mandates or CDC guidelines. It's taxing, and it's certainly not worth the national minimum wage or lower. And if you're relying on tips, then you're definitely out of luck, just because of the foot traffic alone. So I've been fortunate enough to have a great team around me, both there at Jenny's and at my shop right now.
Leona, with remote work being more widespread, big businesses may not, as you pointed out earlier, have the need to rent out large office spaces. Are there any ideas that you have or you've been hearing for creative uses for that office space other than being rented out to companies?
Well, I think the most logical use of those buildings is to be redone as residential buildings. And I think it's time for the downtown to have people living in it. The central business district model is not the model of the future. People want to live and work in nearby to each other. So that's a long game. That's apparently a very expensive change to make to the buildings. But one of the things that we think needs to happen in the central business district is to bring in a lot more tech. And Allie was talking about training and people getting other skills. The mayor does have a big initiative for workforce development to help people who have decided that they want to make a career change to make it. But I think tech is the obvious area. It's a growth sector. The traditional office sectors that the city has seen in the past, like law firms and government, they're just not growing. But tech is continuing to grow, and tech is an amazing area for training and bringing in skills. And what do we have in the Central Business District? But we've got we've got GW University that can apparently has a lot of startups coming out of it, and they go to other cities. They're just really don't stay here. So I think growing the types of office sectors that we have and changing it a little bit to be more modern, I think is a really important strategy for our future.
So why is it difficult, apparently, to convert office space into residential space?
Okay, well, the easiest, most obvious reason is that if you look in an office building, it doesn't have windows. It doesn't have bathrooms, right? The bathrooms, there's one or two, there's a men's room and a woman's room in the whole building on each floor. The people who get windows are really lucky, but most people don't have windows where they live. And when you think about your kitchen or your whatever, people in apartment buildings like windows. So there are some changes. The size and the geometry of the way these office buildings created is harder. People like sunlight where they live. They don't necessarily have it where they work. So that's one of the big differences, is that in some ways it almost makes more sense to tear a building down and rebuild it or break it into two. So there are a number of structural changes, and then right now it's hard to borrow money for these big projects, right? So
I'll add that another perspective that I've heard is that if you look from the perspective of a commercial landlord in downtown, and you're traditionally dealing with, perhaps depending on the size of the building, you're dealing with a pretty small tenant mix. You're dealing with just a few tenants in a building, maybe a couple law firms. If you switch to residential, then all of a sudden you might have 400 tenants, and that's really complicated from a leasing standpoint. It's a completely different proposition to be dealing with all these individual tenants than it is to be dealing with a few safe and stable commercial tenants. So that's another hardship.
Alexia, you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I have a comment. Kind of circling back to ice cream. One viewer shared with us, there was a local ice cream place related to a dairy farm in my hometown. Their jobs were brutal. A lot of the high school athletes took them over the summer because scooping ice cream all day was a good way to keep up our body strength. They paid more than the wait staff jobs too. It all comes back to ice cream.
Yeah, what happens after the summertime? We don't know. Allie, how have our habits changed during the pandemic? Are people spending money on different things?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I mentioned earlier the difference in recreational spending on things like entertainment and dining. Those are still very far down where they were in January 2020. And one interesting trend, and this doesn't surprise me. I mean, if I went to IKEA a couple of weeks ago, and let me tell you, the whole place is sold out. Okay. You can't find anything in IKEA that is in stock. People have been stocking up. It's two factors. Number one, people stocked up on durable goods during the pandemic. As Anika was saying, people started really investing in their home, right? A lot of renovations, and they wanted to buy new furniture. Oh, I hate the way the patio looks. Let's get something new. So that was a big thing. And then number two, the supply chain problem has also been just racking a lot of businesses. I have a couple of doors that I've been waiting on from Lowe's for I don't know how long. I don't know when they're going to come. So people's spending habits definitely shifted to where they were investing more in long-term purchases, durable goods, and just a lot less on travel and entertainment for pretty obvious reasons.
And Anika, have you seen a change in what customers are buying at Nubian Human?
Definitely. We don't buy as many shoes anymore for obvious reasons. But, I think it's also just about really listening to what the customer needs. And that's for us, it's always been a sense of community. So we really try to focus on creating a sense of community at home and feeling connected. So we really do focus on like a lot of different games and puzzles and activities for kids. We also really started purchasing very deep in the kids department as well, because kids were growing, but they weren't necessarily going outside. And then also baby started to do really, really well for us, obviously, you know, within months into the pandemic, because people were having children. So we started really focusing on our buying in those areas too.
Ali, we've focused a lot of this conversation on DC. How have jurisdictions outside of the city been doing during the pandemic, and what have they been seeing?
Well, I think the interesting thing is really just how working from home has truly impacted a lot of businesses in retail, on the retail side and on the hospitality side. I mean, this is purely just anecdotal. I live not that far from the development Pike and Rose in Rockville. That place is bumping, okay, during the day. And I think that is just an example of how the shift toward working from home has really kind of changed the game in some parts of the suburbs. People are simply spending more money closer to where they live. And I think that the longer people stay working remote, the longer we're gonna continue to see that.
Well, Anika, Danielle, some people are concerned that the Delta variant, as well as kids returning to school, could send us into another lockdown. Is that something you're preparing for? Let's start with you, Anika.
Definitely. Yeah. So we have really focused a lot of our dollars on digital advertisements, making sure that our online purchasing is seamless. You know, doing things like adding ourselves to Postmates. So then that way our customer can get our product very quickly. There's also the NEAR program also, which also does home deliveries. So anything that we can do to really prepare ourselves for if we do need to close, even with just supplies. So making sure that we have enough boxes, tape, shipping materials for that time. We have definitely been preparing for that. And even in our meetings with our team, that's a constant topic of how we are addressing COVID and what would happen if we do shut down again.
Danielle, is there anything you're doing to prepare for the possibility of partially or fully shutting down again?
Well, my operation is fairly delicate in that we cannot house a lot of anything, and we make things scratch every day. So that is a little bit tricky, and something that's nerve-wracking to me is the supply chain for the deliveries, because we get deliveries 2 to 3 times a week of fresh ingredients to turn into our products. On the other side of that, like I said, since we are a carry-out only, we're kind of already in the mind frame of like, we don't have to pivot like a lot of full service restaurants did to try to do carry out only. The only other thing I would say we probably need to get ready for, which is already in the works, is a local delivery and or a order online ahead platform. Because to this point, we've just been strictly counter service just to keep up with the demand. So gonna have to work on figuring out what that looks like.
Do you or do you not have a secret coffee truck?
I don't know. I'm not sure where you heard that. I don't know.
I don't know. There are rumors about all kinds of things going around. But what do you see, Ali, as the long-term impacts of the pandemic on local businesses or the local economy in general, and on the way we think about work?
Well, the question about the way we think about work, I mean, that's something that I think is going to be taking shape for a long time. And as far as the impacts on local business, I've been listening to Anika tonight talk about what she's been doing in terms of just, you know, we hear this word pivot, you know, all the time. It's kind of a cliche, but truly, I think a lot of businesses like yours got really creative and started coming up very quickly with new ways of doing business. And that, frankly, is very exciting. And I also think that more people are now accustomed to this kind of pandemic way of shopping where they expect things to be online, and businesses are really responding to that. And I think it's been encouraging to see so much innovation in retail in particular, because and you think about it too. I mean, this is a really great time to have a retail business in many ways because people have money. I mean, it's unfortunate to say because we know this has been such a lopsided recovery, but the recession, for all intents and purposes, is over for higher earning workers. Low wage workers are still in a very tricky place. But as far as spending, it has rebounded in certain sectors of the economy, and I do think that bodes well for many retailers.
I'll put this to all of our panelists, starting with you, Leona. What do you see as the long-term impacts of the pandemic on local businesses, or the way we work, or what we buy?
Well, I see, first of all, the long-term impacts on the downtown office market as being really rough. I think at the moment, 1 out of every 5 square feet is not leased. And that's going to get worse for a couple of years until it turns in like 2024, hopefully. I think that's one thing. I think people, office workers are going to really change the way they work. It's not going to be, as 9 to 5 days a week. It's going to be, a lot more creative. And I do agree that businesses have gotten more creative, and I think they're going to continue. And I think people are going to value that creativity more and more in everything that they do. I mean, I think this is a time to celebrate resilience and creativity, because look at what we have all done, as a world, and how we have all changed the way we live in a couple of days. I mean, it's crazy. And we continue to adapt as we all need to. And I think that's a really positive, good thing, because it shows that we can all adapt. And, there are hard times, but we're all making it through at some way or another. I think people will continue to do that.
Anika, same question to you. What do you see as the long-term impacts? On the one hand, you've got a spanking new bridge for people to come over to that section of the city. On the other hand, the pandemic continues. What do you see as the long-term impacts?
For me, I think as we spoke a little bit earlier, I think technology is really going to be super important. And I think people still want to come into retail spaces, but the way in which we engage our customer is going to be very, very different. And also what we leave them with when they're not here. So how we continue to engage them after they've left here. I think a lot of small businesses have now learned that lesson through the pandemic. That the way in which we used to engage our customers are no longer the same. So I think long-term wise, technology, is going to be really, really huge for big and small. And I think also just being over here with the pandemic happening, construction still happened. So, hopefully for east of the river where we are, in a couple years or so, we'll definitely be able to see some gains from the new construction happening here.
And Danielle, you are one of the people who opened a business during the pandemic and saw that business, in the eyes of most people, become successful. What do you see from your perspective as the long-term impact of the pandemic?
I think for me, the long-term impact means a lot for folks in this industry, hospitality, food and beverage, that there needs to be a change in the model. It's not going to work. It's not sustainable to expect people to give you 80 hours a week, 65 hours a week on their feet, working hard, from the dishwasher to the bartender to the server captain to the cook to the chef, without paying them what they are worth. I think for me, that is like kind of my biggest mission as a business owner, and any other businesses that I plan to open in the future. I want to start people at a more than livable wage and include them in decisions and include them and hopefully in ownership one day. So that's what it is for me.
And I'm afraid that means we're just about out of time. I'd like to thank each of you individually for joining us. I'll start with Ali Schweitzer. Ali, thank you for joining us. Good to see you.
You too, Kojo, and thanks as always.
Anika Hobbs, thank you for joining us. Great to see you too.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Danielle Harris, thank you for joining us. Continued good luck to you.
Thank you. Hope to see you on Upshur soon.
You will. And Leona Aguridis, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you again.
Thanks, Kojo. Same here.
If you missed part of this conversation, or you would like to listen again, we'll be airing an edited version on WAMU this Friday, September 17th at 1 p.m. And a recording will also be available online at WAMU's Facebook page. Mark your calendars for Tuesday, October 19th. We'll have our next Kojo in Your Community event focused on healthcare disparities during the pandemic. More info will soon be posted at wamu.org/events. We'd like to know how you think we did. We hope you'll take a minute to fill out the survey that will appear on your screen. It will help WAMU improve our virtual events in the future. We'd like to say thank you to our wonderful engineering team, particularly Natalie Yu of Lifker, Kennedy Wright, and Cliff Gallagher. And thanks as well to Yanlin Zhang, Julia Slattery, Stephanie Schweike, Tiwan Miner, Renee Hicks, Sydney Grannon, and Ingelisa Schorfdorf. Thank you, Alexia Brown, for helping to guide our conversation this evening. And it was really great to see you too, Alexia. We're especially grateful to WMU's Mana Kashfi, who oversees our content. We'd also like to say a special thank you once more to our sponsor for this event, AARP DC. And finally, and most importantly, thanks to all of you for joining us. I'm Kojo Nnamdi.